This episode is brought to you by RLD Group, on a mission to reboot leadership drive, eradicate burnout in tech, and help transform technical experts lacking people leadership skills from being a company's biggest liability into their greatest asset. On this episode of Control-Alt-Delete with Lisa Dury.
I think giving ourselves permission, along with the education to understand that when I'm burnt out, it's because the demands I'm dealing with collectively, macro and micro, are somehow more than I have resourced myself to deal with. So what do we do about it? It's an unending conversation. But I think it begins with realizing that, first of all, we ourselves are a source.
Leaders in tech are burning out at an absurd rate. Control-Alt-Delete with Lisa Dury is a no BS conversation with a female executive who spent over 25 years in Silicon Valley. If you're suffering from the always-on, never good enough, we'll replace you today machine called the tech space. This show will help you reboot your leadership drive. Here's Lisa.
The question today that is on my mind is, what brings a human system alive? When we think about tech and we think about leadership in tech, how many times have we talked about like the code that is written and what it takes to get the product out the door? But really, the truth of the matter is there's a bunch of humans running around inside that system. And I'm so honored today to have our guest, Jon Berghoff, on Control-Alt-Delete with Lisa Dury. Jon is here because I don't know anybody better than to answer that question. Jon, welcome to Control-Delete.
Hey, Lisa. I'm so glad to be here. Super pumped. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. I'm so excited you're here. So can I just lean into this question for a second, and then we'll make sure people know why I think you're the man with the plan.
Sure. That's fine. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's really the full question is, what brings a human system alive more naturally, effectively, and faster than ever before? And I think any leader in tech is going to lean into that question. And that's your question, right? I mean, that's kind of your why.
Yeah. Well, it was a question that was given to me by a mentor, Dr. David Cooper-Ryder, many years ago. I'm smiling because I am now realizing we're starting by jumping right into the deep end. Mm-hmm. And I'm smiling because I'm more curious about that question than thinking I have all the answers. So I'm looking for your help at the same time. I think what we're seeing when we ask what allows a group of people, a team, an organization, a community to thrive, to come alive, to navigate change, to create a different future, it's a number of things. And I don't know that there's one answer, that we found the answer, but I think at the center of it is the experience of wholeness. And we can talk about what that means. We can talk about what's the human system and why would we even ask this question. But I think at a time when the world is changing maybe far faster than we might feel equipped to deal with that change, the ability to figure out how to unlock some greater potential is so important. And when we say wholeness, we're talking about, can people tap into their strengths? Can they tap into a deeper sense of meaning or purpose, even in the face of really difficult challenges? Can we connect with and relate with each other in ways where we truly feel authentic and safe enough that we can have real conversations so that we can tackle real issues? And collectively, can we realize that we're all connected, that there might be some shared purpose or shared reason? So wholeness can mean a lot of things at many different levels, but that's the first thing that comes up when you ask that question.
Oh my gosh. Okay. So this is why we didn't even start with an intro, right? This is why you want to listen to this episode, everybody. So Jon, you have been an inspiration to me in the past, I would say a little over a year. I found you when you were speaking at a conference on virtual events. It was right at the beginning of the pandemic, when everything was shifting, when the world was changing. Yeah. And I saw you facilitate, and I was like, whatever that guy's doing, I want more of that, because of how I felt. And so one of the things I think that's really important, and why I'm so thrilled you're here today, is that my own journey as a leader, my own journey as a business owner, as a human on the planet, has been profoundly positively impacted by learning from you, by learning with you, by co-creating through the exchange group, through the exchange. I'm not even sure what you want to call it, the exchange approach, right? But what you have created in exchange really has been profoundly, positively life-giving and generative for myself and our clients. And so this is why I want to have this conversation today. I want to share this greatness, this brilliance that you bring and what you've created with our listeners.
Well, thank you. That means the world, and means a lot to hear that. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. So I think we should jump into it. So can you presence for us? Here's what I know. Whenever I'm in any event that you're running or any training that I'm a part of or any co-created whatever, fill in the blank, the way you show up is to be open, curious, and kind. Yeah. That's just how you show up. And I also know that you're on a mission to really change the landscape, if you will, of how groups convene, whether it's a team meeting or a large scale summit, right? Or whatever, sales conference, et cetera. And the thing that I think would be great for us to land is, when you describe what you do and who you are, can you give an intro to everyone listening in so that they can better understand it? Because I know how it makes me feel, but you know your why and what you do. So
yeah.
Who is Jon Berghoff and what do you do, Jon?
Well, I'm a father, a son, a brother, a partner, and a baseball coach. And in a couple hours, I'll coach my 8-year-old son. So in fact, I was just getting all these texts from some of the other coaches talking about our game plan for tonight. And I thought I'd turned everything off, and I'm trying to turn these notifications off. But in my professional world, I actually, to use a pretty unsexy title, I'm a facilitator. That's what I'm often known for, is designing and facilitating large group experiences. And within those experiences, conversations that are designed to unlock collective intelligence. And part of what I really stand for, and you met me at a conference where I was leading an experiential introduction to this, and it's also part of the answer to what unlocks a human system, is this idea that a few of us having all the answers is how we're going to lead our way through whatever we're facing today and into a better tomorrow. This idea that a few of us with some title or some education or some role are going to know what to do when we're dealing with really difficult challenges that we've never really faced before. And instead, how do we ask the kinds of questions and design and choreograph the types of conversations with those questions to unlock that collective capability that lives inside of any group of people or any individual? So you met us, Lisa, because I was introducing our facilitation training, which is just in the last few years, we've had the privilege of introducing that training to over 10,000 folks, just the same way I met you, which is super cool online. We're yet to meet in person. I can't wait till we do. And then we also have had a deep interest not only in how do we lead groups and design what we do in groups to unlock what's possible, but that's really opened up a lot of interest around what's happening inside of us as individuals. Because I really think that what we're seeing is, you mentioned leadership. When you talk about leadership at a time like right now, I think what we're seeing is a necessity for someone who wants to lead positive change to become interested both in how we can lead change in systems or at scale, but also what goes on inside of us as individuals. So that's where a lot of our curiosity has taken us.
Yeah, my curiosities come right along with you. Our clients are probably giggling when they're listening, because it's like everything you're talking about is something we talk about on a regular basis now. So, in the world of tech, always on, never good enough, will replace you tomorrow. I think there's something we should really lean into, which is your philosophy and what I've learned in working with you through the lens of the collective wisdom. So one of the greatest gifts you gave me early on when I started working with your group was being the guide on the side, not being what they would call the sage on the stage. And that whenever I was facilitating any sort of group now, really redesigning it to pour back into the community so they can connect with each other. And in a time when hybrid work is now happening and leaders are kind of like, well, the pandemic's kind of over, let's all just be back in the office. And the introverts and the working parents or the ones with caregivers or invisible disabilities are like, no, don't put me back in the office. People are really like, well, how do we unlock collective wisdom if we can't be in a room together? And I know that it's possible because we're doing it now under guidance with you of what we've learned. And we're also seeing it really happen at the individual level, just in the questions they're asking. Yeah. So I think the invitation right now would be to just, in the world that we're in, which is brittle, anxious, nonlinear, incomprehensible, right? This is the new Bonnie world. Nothing's ever going to be what it was. It's evolving as always, like any system would. But what's the invitation for a leader now who's really like, I should have all the answers. I should be the one telling everybody what to do. We should be back in the same room together always.
Yeah.
When you're consulting with folks and you're talking to them about this, what's the invitation for them to consider? How might they look at this through a different lens?
I'll go back, I think, 13 years to an experience I had when I was a younger executive for the Vitamix Corporation. They make high-end blending equipment. And at the time, I had been brought in to be their head of sales by the CEO. She just retired recently, Jody Berg. She was the fourth generation great-granddaughter of the founder of this company. They were founded in 1921, which is its own really cool story. And I got to think, I guess I was about 26, 27, 28 years old around the time I was brought in. And I had this big responsibility, tens of millions of dollars, hundreds of people. And I had one little voice in my head that said, you know, you're kind of a smart dude. You've got some experience. You ought to know what to do here. And I had another little voice that was often quite loud that said, you really have no idea how to navigate what you are supposed to navigate. And both were true. Both of those voices were speaking the truth. And I was given a gift, Lisa, which is so relevant to, a few years ago when our company thought we don't have a business because everything we used to do was in person. And can you really lead design sprints and strategic planning collaborations or industry-wide conferences with dozens or hundreds of people online and it actually be better than in person? Like before we were trying to answer that question 13 years ago, I was just trying to figure out, how do I lead an organization when I don't really know how to do it? And Jody gave me a gift. She said, Jon, I'm going to encourage you to think of leadership a lot differently, that it's not about knowing what to do, telling others, and controlling and predicting outcomes. She was so wise. She said, think of it this way. It's about what questions do we ask? How do we invite more voices into those conversations so that we can unlock that intelligence that is alive in these groups? And looking back, what I didn't get at the time, Lisa, and it's taken me a long time to understand what she was really teaching me how to do, is how to enable curiosity to be scaled up. Gary Hamel, who's written a lot on management innovation, maybe more than anybody in the history of Harvard Business Review, he talks about how we got to find a way for innovation to come from everywhere. Well, how do you do that? Well, Jody, for me, introduced me to these philosophies and tools around just new ways of leading. So that was 13 years ago, the introduction for me to this idea that, wow, maybe I don't have to know, but if I can have the humility to ask questions and the wisdom to bring others into those conversations. And I eventually learned that not knowing and a certain type of humility is actually magnetic. It's attractive. It actually increases influence. Whereas I think I used to think that because of my title, if I didn't have the answer, it would decrease my influence. And nothing could have been further from the truth. So that's story number one in response to your question.
Yeah. Can I land that with you for a quick second? Because what
please.
You just said, there are so many of our clients who get promoted into these stretch roles because they're ready. But like the leadership team is like, hey, you got 80%. Let's go, kid. Right? Whatever that is. And then they get there and they just get stuck and frozen and feeling like, I think I should just quit. I don't want to fail. Like this happens a lot. And when we're coaching our executives, we're constantly helping them lean into their strengths, lean into the curiosity, look at their whole team makeup and better understand it. And I think your story, I think it's just worth me pausing it for just that moment for people to really hear it. Because what you just said was my influence was greater when I didn't have all the answers. And I found a way to presence that without it taking away from, who I am as a leader, versus if I just have this mental model and belief that I have to have all the answers, that makes me influential. Well, it doesn't. Mm-hmm. Knowledge is one source of power, right? So I thank you for sharing that story, and please continue. It was so important. I had to land that for the listener. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. And as you shared that, I think what came to mind for me is, so there's a whole paradigm shift, and then there's a set of tools. And I was introduced to one tool called appreciative inquiry and another one called design thinking, and all these other group methodologies for how do you enable groups to have conversations that connect them to a shared purpose or a set of shared solutions, et cetera, et cetera. And one of the things that it also needed in order to work was a certain type of leadership style from Jody that I over time tried to learn how to embody, which was her creating the conditions for me to feel safe to take risks. And so that has to be coupled with this style of leadership. It's one thing to say, well, let's listen to ideas, let's experiment, because we need that. We got to find new ways. But then how do we respond? Or do we react unconsciously when others take a risk and make a mistake? And I learned a lot from watching how she responded. And it wasn't that we would just ignore mistakes, but we also honored that mistakes were inevitable. And what was not guaranteed was, do we learn from them? So let's learn faster from whatever we're doing. For me, Lisa, the other story that came up for me earlier when you were bringing this up was about 3 years ago when how many years ago was it? 2 years ago? The pandemic got here.
Yeah, it's like a decade and then a moment in time.
Yeah. It's like a lifetime. Pandemic years are like dog years, aren't they?
Pandemic years are dog years. I definitely agree.
Yeah. So March 2020, right? So I'll share something interesting about that moment for us is, we had been out there teaching coaches and consultants and leadership trainers how to design and facilitate these different types of conversations. We've been doing that for a handful of years. And here the pandemic got here and it was like, oh my goodness, we've been telling others, here's how you help teams and organizations to navigate change. Now we better figure out how to navigate change. Otherwise we don't have a business. And one of the things that we did, and I feel so fortunate that we have this incredible team at Exchange, and several of our team members said, well, let's make sure that we live what we teach right now. And so they said, let's question the questions that we're asking. Because when the sky's falling, our biology says we better do something. And there's an argument, there's some firefighting and life-saving, we understand that. But then we quickly need to pause and check in to see if we're just unconsciously reacting. And we were, and as many are and can relate to. And our team said, well, why don't we think about what questions matter most when we are facing challenges like this that we did not see coming? And we very quickly realized we need to stop asking, what do we need to do? What new solutions do we need to create? Eventually, we needed to get to those questions. Mm-hmm. But we realized we first needed to ask, who do we need to be right now? Because the degree to which we had to create new solutions, the degree to which we had to do some shit and solve some problems that we had never solved, we were going to need to be somebody or something that I don't think we'd ever been. There's some Einstein quote. I don't even remember it. Forgive me, Einstein, or anyone who remembers the quote.
Yeah.
Like, you can't solve today's problems with the thinking that got you here, right? Well, I feel like the person I am, I can't solve today's problems as the same person that got me here. So who are we going to be? And we had some amazing conversations as a team. We were really holding a mirror in front of ourselves and saying, how are we going to be? How are we going to treat each other? How are we going to treat our customers? And instantly, because the questions change the future before the answers arrive. You ask a new question, you can't help, but just like a lens, it's going to change whatever shows up. And we realize, okay, who we need to be for ourselves and each other, first of all, is compassionate. Like, we need to realize, Steve's over here homeschooling his kids, and Adair's over here trying to figure out how this is going to work. And, we're over here trying to figure out what does it mean to be in a lockdown. So first thing is we needed to be compassionate and flexible with each other. And then when we moved beyond that conversation, it was who do we need to be for our customers? And at that time, we had so much on the line financially. And there was a big event coming up that was supposed to be in person. And we realized, okay, this could put us under. And we went to these customers and we realized we needed to be just as compassionate and flexible with them as we were saying we needed to be with ourselves. We needed to be generous, radically generous, intense in our thoughtfulness. And so we came up with some strategies, including, hey, if you want to stay with us as customers for some window of time, pay whatever you can. And I'll tell you, we looked long and hard at the economics of that decision, and it was really easy to look at a model that said, this won't work. Well, the opposite happened. And from there, we developed a whole new way of doing things online, which gets to the last point you brought up, which is, can you really have cohesive, collaborative, human, enjoyable gatherings online? So I'll reveal my strong opinion based on a lot of experience. There is no such thing as Zoom fatigue. There's no such thing as online meeting fatigue. There's what we call shitty meeting design fatigue.
Wait, let's land that. Shitty, I laughed so hard. Shitty meeting design fatigue? Is that what you said?
It doesn't roll off the tongue at all. It's not a great marketing label.
SMDF, shitty meeting design fatigue. Did I get it right? I totally agree with you. 100%. We're dropping the yes. Yes.
Yeah. So, I mean, we've led, I've lost count. 10,000 people have come through some version of our live online trainings in the last 2 years. We've led thousands of people through multi-day, 8-hour-a-day immersive trainings where 95+% of the cameras are on, people are present the whole time. Now, if someone's listening and they're like, how? Why? Like, that's not what I'm used to. Well, that's what we do. There's a whole strategy on how to do that, on how you invite people, how you create agreements, how they are facilitated, how energy is managed, how we remember that we can bring play through these screens. So long story longer, I think the companies that are led by folks that are, I would say 40 years or older, we're going to call these native analogs who didn't grow up with their eyes fixated to screens. Mm-hmm. It's so hard to accept the idea that a lot of our work can actually work well or even better remotely or through a screen. To anyone who's, I'm just going to say about 35 years or younger, we're going to call them a native digital. Like the physical world is actually an interruption to their real world. And these two generations don't actually understand each other. The funny thing is you look at, I might incorrectly speak here, but I'm pretty sure Apple, Google, Facebook, LinkedIn, the founders of these companies are all native analogs. And I think 3 out of these 4 companies have all made an effort to get all their employees back to work. And anybody who's watched the news, what happened? Massive, incredible pushback. Why? Because you have one generation saying, we got to do it this way. Their workforce is another generation saying, we're not buying that. Mm-hmm. So there's a confrontation there. And it doesn't mean it's simple, but I think there's a generational gap that's kind of the meta issue with this whole, and don't ever say to someone, come back to work either. Because I've been working the whole freaking time. More. Yeah, exactly. So I'll leave all that right there.
Returning to the office. Yeah, no, I really appreciate that perspective so much because just last week I was running my first in-person in 2 years and I didn't want to go. And I've got some mobility issues I'm dealing with right now, getting on the plane, getting over there, right? But I also knew if I could get them, then we can do something with it. So I went. And it was so interesting because I facilitated so much of this work we all have in our organization digitally. And then to be in person, I even forgot how long it's going to take to move people, right? So I was thinking about it. Well, you push a button and someone goes to a breakout room. You do it live. They're moving, they're getting coffee, they're talking, right? Yeah. And the other thing that was mind-blowing to me was how much technology's even changed. So I have my whole setup here. I've got my sound effects. I've got my switcher. But in there, I had to do it all on my laptop and remember which window I had open and play the music and play the timers and do all that. And it really reminded me that when you stop doing something, you do forget. Yeah. And so I think that one of the real lessons for all of us, I think it's an invitation, is what have we forgotten? And what is working? I think I love when you always talk about appreciative inquiry from the best of what was, what is, and what could be.
Yeah.
So like that might be the invitation to the 2 different generations to be able to have a conversation so that we could just presence and bubble that up.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. And the other interesting thing, when you gave that example, it reminded me, I spent a lot of time at large conferences, either teaching our stuff or actually designing and facilitating these conferences. And I'm not going to name names, but I was at one industry conference recently. And I'm there on day 1 because I'm facilitating this whole leadership experience on day 2. I just wanted to observe the culture of the conference. And I think one of the things that we need to remember, maybe this is something we need to forget, I'm looking around the room and half the day, half these C-level executives are on their phones. Mm-hmm. And I'm thinking, what they need to remember here or let go of is that the way they're spending time in the room is a bit of a joke in the first place. The idea that we're going to fly all the way in and then spend most of our time completely disconnected from what's happening in the room. Now there's a whole debate. Whose fault is that? Maybe it's the designer of that convening and realizing, well, maybe they're on their phones because of how easy it is to be, because all we're doing is sitting them down and passively giving them information instead of engaging them in critical conversations. That's a whole other chat. But I look at that and think, here's something to remember. The way we run meetings was obsolete before the pandemic got here. I was an enemy of the whole conference industry back in 2019 when I went on a couple podcasts and said, here's why this industry is obsolete. Here's why these conferences are going to go out of business. And interesting thing was everything that seemed to be true back then, it's even more true now, but I see that we're forgetting that these large gatherings were already a big waste of time. So it makes you wonder, why are we wanting to get back in person? Well, because there is something meaningful about human connection. Well, if there is, the people in that room to each other, don't sit them there and just have them look at the stage.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or is it us just trying to control people because we don't have confidence in how well we can lead a remote virtual group? So we think that, hey, get back in person. That allows us in our organizations to control things. So I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I think too, it also, to your generational point, it goes back to the comfort level of the person who's paying the bills. Right? Who's sponsoring it? Like, well, I want to be, and let's have a golf outing and do all these things. And there's been such a movement in my own business and with our own collective around inclusion and belonging and recognizing that golf outing is not inclusive for many people. Right. And so just really thinking about that. So one of the things that I really think is worth presencing right now is for the leader who's like, this is all great, but how do I do it in my own team meeting? Like my next all hands meeting, or perhaps my Friday forecast call with my sales team, or the war room where we're going through all of the, the bug fixes that have been requested of our software. Is there a question or an invitation that you would like to presence for the leader who's like, I kind of buy into what they're saying, but I don't know what's my first step?
Yeah.
What do you typically recommend to people?
Yeah. Well, I think there's a couple things. One is embracing the role of curiosity, right? Embracing what it means to bring curiosity into that room, right? And to bring it into the room means I'm not going to come into this room with my pre-baked ideas, and my objective is simply to convince everybody. Some of that could be true, but can I tilt the scale to where I'm as open to being influenced by others as I am showing up to try and convince them of my ideas? There's massive amounts of research that would suggest, Marshall Asada, Emily Heafy at a University of Michigan, back in 2003, 2004, they published a seminal study that measured this and then presented it for the first time, that if you compare teams, and how does work get done? Through people in teams during meetings often. If you compare teams that are low performing, moderately performing, and high performing, you can measurably, empirically see that the better teams are the ones that are genuinely more curious, right? The spirit of inquiry versus the spirit of advocacy. If someone's listening to this, they say, well, that sounds nice. What do I do? Well, the reason I start with this point that we have to believe in the power of curiosity is because I could give you a couple questions to present to the group, but if I, as that manager, leader, am not genuinely curious about their answers, then this will do more harm than good. So I've got to have that curiosity for myself. What are the kinds of questions that we can ask? Well, there's questions that can kind of set the table for a really powerful conversation. And there's questions that are really strategic within the conversation. So, here's one example. Let's say we've got a challenge or a problem that we're trying to solve. There's one body of teaching around, is it smarter to solve the problem by saying, how do we solve the problem? Or is there actually a different question that could help us more effectively solve that problem? Let me give you a couple real world examples. An airline wants to fix their lost baggage problem. This is a real example. And they were introduced to this concept that, okay, if you're about to bring a whole bunch of smart people together to fix your lost baggage problem, which, by the way, anybody listening, if we were in charge of an airline, that's a rational question. Like, that's understandable, right? That's fair. But what they were taught is, if you dwell on the problem or you put a question up in front of our eyes like a lens that fixates so much in a way that all we become focused on is what we call a deficit. In other words, how bad it is, who got us here, all the measurements around that, whose fault it is. And then from there, okay, what are we going to do, right? In the 70s, there was a concept that was introduced, Lisa, called the difference between negative and positive deviance. And the idea of positive deviance is, instead of asking, how do we fix the problem? there's another way to fix the problem, but by changing the question from how do we fix the lost baggage problem to how do we create, and this is what they did, how do we create an exceptional arrival experience? And I'll let that sink in for a second, because part of the lesson here is we can get really stuck on our problems, but never actually ask, what is it we ultimately want? The opposite of broken is not always excellent. The opposite of broken is sometimes fixed. How inspiring is that, right? Yeah. So that airline not only solved their lost baggage problem, but they created a whole bunch of innovations that won them industry awards. And I'll just bring this home with a personal example. My daughter, Sierra, she brings home a report card. So part of the lesson here is when you're dealing with problems, what's the lens that we put on right at the outset? Because it'll affect how we address those problems. My daughter, Sierra, is 10. She comes home with a report card. There's a few A's, a few B's, and a C. And I teach this stuff at work, but yet I'm sitting there in my head saying, don't say it, don't say it, don't say it. And when I ask her about her grades, I'm wanting to ask about the positive grades, but of course I say, tell me how you got the C. What happened here, right? Now here's the interesting thing. Just like at home, at work, time is so scarce. You only have so much time for these conversations. And so when I asked her, how'd you get this C? First of all, do you think she was excited to talk about it? Not really. Yeah. You know, I got some half answer for a few minutes, and then we had to go to soccer practice or wherever I had to go. In retrospect, what the research suggests, what my experience has shown, is that the smarter use of that scarce time to solve that problem would not be to ignore the problem, but instead to ask, how did you get the A's? Because here's what's really interesting. If we learn how to ask about what's the positive opposite that we ultimately want, what do we ultimately want in this situation, right? This is coming from a place of strength versus a place of deficit. There's a whole other set of questions that can help us to unlock those strengths. For example, I could say, what did you do to get that A? What could you learn from what you did? How does it feel right now when you think about getting that A's? Okay, based on that, how could you apply that to the class where you got the C, right? There's a better chance the C will improve if I only asked, how did you get the A? Versus if in that limited time we ask about the C. Mm-hmm. So that's one example for someone in their next meeting. If it becomes a deficit conversation, can you have the courage and the preparedness to flip the conversation to, well, what is it that we ultimately want? So that's just one example, if that's of use. I hope it is.
It's super, super useful. And I want to present something. So we do a strengths work with all of our clients, and the strength of restorative is a really prevalent, I mean, high execution and restorative and responsibility are always in the mix. And restorative is always about looking for what's wrong and fixing it. Right? Yes. They can see, they can spot. And I had a very similar experience with we were running a workshop, and the leader was like, I don't feel like the team trusts me. Like, I don't feel like they're giving me the truth. We looked at the strengths. Here's restorative. I go, so tell me, in restorative land, how do you language this? Right. And it was, how did you get the C? Or what about this C? And the leader was like, I do that to my kids all the time. Like, they were getting A's. And I'm like, how do you get to the A plus? And I said, so I think there's two parts to this. One is being clear on a strength that you bring, which you can find problems, you can see, right? And the second part is languaging and picking your words really carefully to bring out the best in others, because that's just shutting down. And I don't want to get told I'm wrong, or what did I do wrong? So your example, it's not lost on me because it happens all the time in our engagements. And then the second thing that you said that I would love to invite you into the conversation with this question: when people are burning out, especially in tech, I say especially because that's my background. I'm just going to say when people are burning out, it's my experience that the questions are very depreciative in nature. Why can't I make this decision? How come I can't find my car? Why am I gaining weight? What's wrong with me? What's wrong with me, right? And I'm wondering if that might lend itself well for you to offer a different lens, because one of the things I admire about you is how quick you are in reframing questions. And I think, I have my own perspective on it, but given that we're here and we're right now in these meetings, I'm thinking about what that question would be, or questions. Yeah. What comes to mind when I bring that kind of mindset? And maybe you have your own burnout experience and you asked your own questions. I don't know.
Yeah, I think I experience burnout every other day. How do you define burnout? Just curious.
Yeah, so burnout is physically your battery is empty. You are no longer able to function. You're cynical. You can't problem solve. Think of it like with the work we do in Awakening Conscious Leadership. It's that cycle of reactivity, like the very base of that.
Yeah, well, I think the first thing, and maybe I just say this to make myself feel better, is Any of us who've ever felt what you're describing, and I do. I think we need to give ourselves permission or give ourselves a bit of a hall pass to understand that's happening because the demands that we are dealing with, I'm guessing you've talked a lot about this with your clients.
I know where we're going. I love it. Yes, please. Yep.
Yeah, the demands that we are facing. And by the way, what are demands? Sometimes we think demands. We got this big project and there's a lot on the line. There's a lot at stake, or we're behind, or we're failing, or we have no idea how we're going to get through this. Yeah, those are demands. And of course, there's demands at home, right? That could feel really big and intense. But demands are also that person in the meeting who shoots you a look, or that person who ignores you. A demand could be microscopic. I mean, how many of us have gotten pissed off when we're stuck in traffic and we create a whole story about someone else? That micro moment clearly was a big enough demand that it had more control over us than we did, for any of us who are willing to admit to these reactive responses to these demands. So first thing I would say is that I think giving ourselves permission, along with the education, to understand that, okay, when I'm burnt out, it's because the demands I'm dealing with collectively, macro and micro, are somehow more than I have resourced myself to deal with. So what do we do about it, right? Well, and that's an unending conversation. It's an unending conversation. But I think it begins with realizing that first of all, we ourselves are a source. We are a source of creativity. We're a source of energy. We're a source of possibility. And realizing that we can find the capacity within to turn ourselves around, but also taking a responsibility in knowing that how we show up, there's something called social contagiousness. And this has been measured for decades, that how we show up inseparably affects how everybody else feels. So we got to take responsibility for what's going on inside of us, both for ourselves and for others, right? And so we were talking a minute ago about the questions that we ask. Well, you can see me on the screen. I've got a picture, a canvas behind me on the wall in our offices of sunflowers. And one of the reasons I have this here is to remind us of a principle. And it's the idea that in nature, because I think Mother Nature has most of the answers for us, in nature, everything grows towards the sun. It's called the heliotropic effect. And in our daily interactions, we like to think of it this way. We grow towards that which gives us life. In other words, I as a leader, if I want to make all this really simple, do the people around me, when they walk away, do they feel more energized or less energized? In fact, there's been research studies on the concept of positive energy networks. Professor Kim Cameron has been measuring this, that in and of itself is one of the most important measurements, is when we walk away, do the people who were in contact with us feel more or less energized? But it all begins long before we're asking questions with what goes on inside of us, which can include mindfulness practices, the ability to pause, to notice, is what's getting in the way an internal dialogue, right? Is it a feeling? Is it an image? Is it a combination of all of these things? If I lose concentration, if I lose control, if I'm unconscious, if I'm asleep to my reactivity, I can develop the practices to notice that a little bit sooner, to notice it when it's smaller, so that before the wave gets so big, I can see it and ride it instead of get pulled under. And I think you were asking this, Lisa, so I'll share. One of the keys to that ability to pause, to notice what's going on and make a new choice, is to realize how often what's happening inside of us is just an internal story or a dialogue, right? Where I'm unconsciously having some version of a conversation that's really answering the question, why is this happening to me? Instead of how might this be happening for me? Or how bad is this situation versus, well, what can I appreciate about this situation or this person? Right? And often that judge or that inner critic that's really well skilled at catching everything that we're bothered by around everyone else, even if we've caught that inner critic, we might not realize how often that inner critic is judging ourselves. So the ability to hear these inner conversations is its own journey of practices. Mindfulness is one pathway there. So let me stop and see what that brings up.
I think it's awesome. There's so much to unpack there. And for the time that we have today, I'm going to just encourage people to listen again and take some notes, because there's so much goodness in what you just shared. And I don't mean goodness like I'm judging it as good. I mean, I know it will help you feel good, right? So one of the things that the question that comes to mind that really has changed the way I look at things, what matters most right now? And that's the question I learned in the work with Dr. Danny Friedland and you in exchange with the Awakening Conscious Leadership Program, which we now deliver. One of the things I know from my own experience is that you have to do the work to be able to bring the work forward. And so that's the question that kind of is my reminder all the time is what matters most right now. And if I'm on my phone and my daughter needs me and I'm frustrated, like, there's not enough time, I'm like, that's the wrong question.
Yeah.
Right. And so I just constantly remind myself. So your example of the report card or the team meeting, Jon, I just love and I appreciate how you show up with so much science and heart. Like, I don't know if people are picking up on it, but you are always quoting where you're learning things from and you remember it so effortlessly and you bring it into it and then you put your own examples on it. I think it's a really, whoever's listening or watching right now there's a lot to gain from that because it's not about you being the expert. Like, you're actually modeling what you're saying you believe in, which is like, I have other people that are informing me too. This is what I'm taking with me, and here's how I'm showing up. So I appreciate that we were able to presence that for a meeting and any leader to really just remember that all those people in that room want to be adding value and they all have experience and they all have ideas. And if you can really be curious and create that environment where it's safe, that's essential. What's possible, to imagine what is possible with that. Yeah. I appreciate you presencing that. Okay. So let me ask you this question. So when we think about all this, I know music is a key part for me when it comes to regulating my nervous system, being inspired by something, whether we're tending and befriending or rising to the challenge. I'm curious, and I know how much you love music because I'm with you a lot in all of these experiences, but is there a song lately right now that is really on your heart and mind that you would want to presence for others that might inspire them either to be more reflective for themselves, to invite some pausing and noticing, or perhaps when they need to just rise to the challenge and get energized? Is there a song?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Well, I wish I could talk about so many different songs because, as you know, we bring so much music into our gatherings. I'm torn between 2 or 3 or 10. The group Rising Appalachia has a beautiful song called Make Magic. Part of the meaning for that song to me is remembering that what's possible, not guaranteed, and unfortunately not the default, but what's possible when 2 or 3 or more people come together is magical. And that's one thing I love about that song. The second one I want to honor is a musician who I just came across in the last year, Rob Ricardo. And his songs are soulful and elevating and talk about remembering. They're all reminders to me of how to navigate my internal world, especially in the face of difficult challenges. He has one song called When Will I Learn? One of the lines in the song is, when will I learn that I've got this? When will I learn that everything I need is already inside me? I love those lyrics. It aligns with a belief that I have, which is no matter how difficult the challenges that I'm facing, I've got this. Whatever I need is inside of me. And whatever my team is facing, like, we've got this. It doesn't mean it's going to be easy. It doesn't mean there's not going to be a lot of friction, tension. That's a good thing, but I want to remind myself of that. Last one, Jason Mraz has a song called My Kind, and it's about my kind of people. And I love that song for a lot of reasons. One of them is when I think about working with our team at Exchange, and frankly, all of our clients and our members, like yourself, I remind myself that even everything that makes us different, and even everything that when I'm unconscious, I want to judge about other people, which is such a distraction, such an energy of separation, which gets in the way of everything important, that deep down inside, there's something that we all share in terms of an aspiration to create something positive in our lives. And that song reminds me that everybody I interact with in some way is my kind of people. And I want to remember that. Those are a few songs that I love.
It's interesting. I had my idea it was 1, but those other 2, I'm so excited for. And I love that you gave 3, because I think the invitation that you for people, the invitation is to remember, if someone asks you for 1 and you have 3, share them all. Whatever that 1 or 3 is. You know what I mean? Like, to not censor or hold back, because we would have missed out on the other 2.
That's cool.
So I appreciate that. Yeah.
Thanks.
So let me ask you this. The double dog dare time is here when we think about everything we've talked about and everything we've presenced, the stories that we've told. You're the leader sitting there listening to this episode right now. What's the invitation? What question might they ask? What action might you invite them to consider? It's along the lines of what's one small action you can take, right? And like what's the positive impact, and also what's at risk if you don't. So what's on your heart? What's a double dog dare for our listeners?
A double dog dare. Wow. I'll point to something I heard you say a few minutes ago, which is, and this is me talking to myself, by the way, because I'm getting ready.
Don't we
to
always?
I
know, right?
Yeah.
I'm writing my notes. Here comes the double dog dare.
It's the illusion of I'm here to speak to the millions of people that will listen to this, but this is for me getting ready to coach 8-year-old baseball. It's to remember to ask the question you offered, which is what matters most, or a version of that is what matters most right now. Mm-hmm. And I'm often reminded that in a position of influence, and someone who wants to be a positive influence in all the interactions I'm in, what often matters most is who I'm being and how well I prepare myself so that when I am in the presence of others, I can be fully there for them. And I can remember that all the shit I got going on in the background, all the stuff that unfortunately is what's often going to be the reason I'm not fully present. All the stuff that's going to be the reason why I'm worried about yesterday, worried about tomorrow. I got to remember that everyone else, even these kids, it doesn't matter who, everyone's got some version of that stuff. And if I can be someone that when they interact with, it lifts them up a little bit. When I interact with them, if I help to be a presence that literally resets their nervous system in a positive way through how I look at them, through the tone of my voice, but all of that is tethered to my heart. It's all tethered to these qualities that this sounds too simple to be important, I think, sometimes. But our friends at the Heart Math Institute, they've been researching this for 40 years. Of course, wisdom traditions have been telling us this for thousands of years, that these qualities of the heart might be the simple answer even to these complex problems, is just show up being open, kind, and curious, like you told me you were going to be showing up in this conversation. So that's an offering there. Double dog, triple scoop of dare right there.
That's right. So double dog dare, ask yourself what matters most right now. Triple dog dare, check in with your heart, right? Stay open, curious, and kind.
Yeah.
Dude, thank you. I mean, everyone knows when I say dude, it's like the exclamation point on top of everything. You even talk
I have a sound effect for that.
There we go. Which I love this sound effect. You talked about resetting the nervous system, which really is Control-Alt-Delete, right? We are talking, this is the whole point. This is the point. So listen, I know how to find you because I found you on that magical day with Barry and Blue's virtual event on virtual events.
Yeah.
But for those that are not there and are listening right now, what's the invitation to connect with you? Where should they find you?
The best way to find me, we have a web page where we always have stuff that we give away in terms of some video resources. There's a bunch of stuff there. You don't even have to opt in for it. Just go to the page. When you go to the page, if you want, come meet me. You can sign up to come meet me at one of our live experiential introductions to what we do. And we do these maybe once a month or so. As of today, I still lead all of them live. I don't know that that'll continue. But I'd love to meet anyone who's listening to this. Mm-hmm. Show up to one of our live introductory workshops, either introducing how we design and facilitate, or this Awakening Conscious Leadership work, how we convert reactivity into creativity. And the URL for that is Exchange Approach, the letter X, the word change, approach.com/unlock potential.
Okay, we'll put it in the show notes too.
Yeah, cool.
Love it. Highly recommend it. Anyone listening, please go do that. It's no joke. It's game changing. It's been life changing. It's been so energizing doing all this work, and I'm honored to be a part of your community and to presence you with our listeners. And Jon, thank you. Thank you for showing up and being all in, and for helping us navigate this bonny world. One moment at a time, and to find a way to resource ourselves in every interaction that we're doing. It means a lot.
Thank you, Lisa. It means a lot to me. It's such an honor. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jon. All right, everybody, your double dog dare. What matters most? Open, curious, and kind. See you next time.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of Control-Alt-Delete with Lisa Dury. Head on over to wherever you find your other favorite podcasts and subscribe to Control-Alt-Delete with Lisa Dury. Leave a review with some of that 5-star love. And let's keep it real. There's a reason why you're listening to this. If you don't get the support you need and start making changes in your life and work as a leader in tech, you can expect regret and burnout in the near future. Lisa and the team at RLD Group have been in your shoes, sat in those meetings, and experienced everything you can imagine as a leader in tech. They can help you get kick-ass results at work without burning out, so you can be present for the moments that matter to you and your loved ones. Take your first step by visiting rldgroupllc.com. RLD Group helps develop technical experts lacking people leadership skills from being a company's biggest liability into their greatest asset. Find out more at rldgroupllc.com. Thanks again for listening. Catch you next time on Control-Alt-Delete with Lisa Dury, powered by RLD Group, as we help you reboot your leadership drive.